From Studio 1A in Tampa, Florida, comes a talk show that really feels your pain and tells you like it is. We love America and all that freedom-loving Americans want to protect. Live from coast to coast and on your radio, it's For the People with Keith Allen.
We'll help you survive this thing called life. We're for the people. Whatever your source of stress or strife, for the people is there.
Well, hello, Mr. and Mrs. America. I am Keith Allen and proudly welcoming you to this Thursday's edition of For the People on a July the 27th, 2017. Yesterday, as the news came out and, news breaks and we talk about the latest news and breaking news and sometimes news that you don't hear because it's buried because the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about the most important things. But today, we are going to have a very intelligent conversation with a professor that might be able to shed some light on what's going on yesterday. And I'm talking about what Caitlyn Jenner is actually talking about. And it's, he's slamming Trump right now, as you can imagine, because of President Trump's ban on transgender persons in the United States military. And basically what Jenner is saying is, what happened to your promise to fight them? Well, let's talk to somebody who is very fascinating. You're going to learn in the next hour a little about Robert Lopez. He is a professor and a very unique story. We're not going to share his story immediately, but for first take as a professor, when you first heard of this breaking news, did you know where the president was coming from, where he was saying no transgender, allowed in the military? What did you think?
I understood where he was coming from. I was expecting that some kind of big gesture was going to come forth to get everyone off of the topic of Russia and off of these other things. I mean, some people would cynically call that a distraction method, but I would just say that it's reasonable to try to get people discussing things where we can actually make a change instead of going around in circles, right? So I understood the motivations perhaps behind it. I also understand the context for it. I was in the military, in the Army Reserves, when the debate about Don't Ask, Don't Tell unfolded and when it was repealed. And I think it was a complete myth that repeal went over smoothly and that there were no costs to repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The number of same-sex assaults went higher after the repeal, and so did the suicide rate because people couldn't chapter out of the military using that article anymore. So I understand that this idea that Obama had put in place of trying to repeat the same thing with transgenders, which is even much more complicated, it makes sense that the president would have to make some kind of very bold gesture to just put a stop to this so that people don't keep on whittling away at the effectiveness of the military little by little.
Now, we don't want to, put in to the mix because a lot of people that just may not know and be on the up and up about everything. And there's people, that really don't monitor other people's sexuality so closely as a lot of these reality TV shows do, Professor.
Right.
But being gay and being a transgender are usually different things, right?
Yeah, one deals with what kind of sex gives you pleasure. The other one is actually what you believe your body is. It's an identity and a self-perception issue. They are related because the LGBT movement has chosen to yoke them together, and it's the same organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, like the Lambda Legal Fund, like the Global Equality Fund, and GLAAD. They fight for all of.
Yeah,
that's why they created that.
Why? So, do they do this because of funding reasons? Was it a smart move that they did it this way?
Well, one of the things I should tell you is I grew up in the gay community. My mother was gay. I came out as gay when I was 13, and then I left the gay lifestyle at 28. So I had a pretty good experience in the community. It is true that in the community, as you experienced it, all of these different groups did commingle. So, for instance, a lot of times when you would have a social event where homosexuals would go to meet each other, there would be drag queen performances, And often men who were in relationships with transgender women were also friends with a lot of gay men. So there was a certain amount of the community coming together around this because people felt like they had a shared experience of being marginal or discriminated against. But also, yes, practically speaking, the funding is also a big issue because the same people who are funding the gay movement also are funding the transgender movement. And as the gay movement had all of its big successes already and doesn't have much left to fight, really, they had to rebrand themselves as fighting for trans causes in order to keep getting funding.
Interesting. And Obama was very sympathetic. Now, I don't know this to be true, but if you've heard something, let me know. I don't know if you know the last name Donovan. I forget his first name, but he was a basketball player in Chicago. But anyway, he had told me when he lived in Chicago that he saw Obama himself frequent a lot of tranny bars when he was younger.
Well, I haven't. Right, yeah. I don't know anything about that. Yeah, I don't have any inside scoop on Barack Obama. I can say that his preoccupation with and allegiance with the LGBT movement was really damaging. It was very bad. I think it did a lot to damage race relations because so many of the advancements that the LGBT movement they got really by stealing the rhetoric and the history of black people. They tried to compare themselves to the civil rights movement, and that had a disastrous impact on the legal status of anti-racism protections.
I agree.
Obama just kind of let that happen. Yeah.
Now, I'm not a professor. I'm just a run-of-the-mill talk show host. Hopefully, we're a little bit better for our audience here. But I read that into it, and I was always confused. And the reason why I set it up a little bit to kind of explain it a little bit more accurately, because I think it is confusing for heterosexuals to try to understand, what's going on and what's what. And so hodgepodging transgendered people that are transitioning into another sex that they feel that they are, or mentally in their minds, and then with a gay person, it's completely different. So I think it's confusing for some people to say, oh, transgender gay, but that's not exactly what that means. Now, you said something very interesting. I just wanted to pause you, but I let you continue because you're so fascinating already. So I can tell you that an hour is going to be amazing. You're saying that it's behavioral. It's a decision that somebody makes. Why do people make this kind of decision? Isn't it kind of a drastic measure for somebody to want to change their entire sexuality?
Well, there are a lot of factors going into this, and I can tell you where I'm coming from in terms of my scholarship in the humanities. I'm a literature and humanities professor, so I've studied this going all the way back to the ancient Greeks and Romans and the biblical texts. There's always been a certain level of same-sex activity, and it often combines this Burdash identity of people who cross-dress, etc., with people who pursue sexual gratification with the same sex. But I think when you get to the mid-19th century and the 20th century, it becomes something very different. And partly this is because Darwin, when he published The Origin of Species, he came up with the idea that instincts or behaviors were actually partly genetic, that they were things that were passed down through genetics. And so science then all of a sudden became very interested in classifying sexual behaviors because for Darwin, sexual selection was really important. So really from this little scientific movement then grew this fascination, this obsession, almost this kind of unhealthy preoccupation with trying to classify people according to their sexual behaviors and their sexual traits. And it was really kind of science gone amok, if you think about it, because for thousands of years, yes, there are moments when people feel some kind of arousal towards someone of the same sex, but that doesn't mean that you need to castrate yourself to become a woman. It doesn't mean that you need to engage in some kind of unsanitary sex act with that man to relieve yourself. It's just part of the human experience. And the Bible was very savvy about this and told us, if you see this happening, you've got to stop it because, when you let it run full reign and when you make it who you are and when you feed it, then it becomes an unhealthy thing in society. So I think what happens today is that just there's been so much hype about it. There's so many people who are making money off of this or who are scoring political points off of it, that when you have a young person who's growing up and they're maybe experiencing some kind of attraction during wrestling class, let's say, all of a sudden there's all these things that have been suggested to that child that will cause the child to try to blow it out of proportion, to dwell on it, to obsess over it, and then to try to make it part of their identity.
Our guest is Robert Lopez, and he was an associate professor of English at Cal State University in Northridge before he was forced to leave. I'll ask you in a moment when I'm kind of setting this up here why that was. But interesting, you now teach at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Dallas, which is phenomenal. You set it up and let us know that you were raised by a lesbian mother with the help of her lifelong female partner in Buffalo, New York. Went on to receive an undergraduate degree from Yale, and you got your doctorate and MA in English classics from sunny Buffalo. So you definitely got a lot of education, and I would just have to say, as an evangelical, you have to have an amazing testimony.
Well, thank you very much for letting me share it. By the way, thank you for having me on. I think that I do have things to add, and I try to always bolster the things that I know from experience with research, so that people can't just dismiss what I'm saying based on personal experience. But I have seen a lot, and one of the things that I've noticed about my experience in the academy is that this movement, the LGBT movement, which you don't need to equate with actual gay people in your life. You may know gay or trans people in your life who are very good people who you get along with and you don't want to discomfort. But the actual movement, the organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, really are very dangerous, because what they're doing is they have infiltrated institutions like the military and higher education, and they actually try to use their influence over people in power to force falsehoods on people. They try to force people to believe things that are not true and to say things that they don't believe. And I think that's always the road to totalitarianism. And I saw that at Cal State Northridge, because I had real information about the impact of same-sex parenting and the impact of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell on the military. And I was essentially driven out of that job, because any way that I spoke about it, it was viewed as harassment or discrimination against gay people. But I was never protected from discrimination or harassment for being evangelical. So we're in a very, very dangerous, contradictory situation in society, and I think the debate about trans service in the military is an opportunity for us to really take a step back and say, where have we gotten? Why is it that it is so widespread that people would believe something like, having transgender soldiers in the military is going to have no impact on unit cohesion or on expenses? That's ridiculous. Of course, their surgeries cost thousands of dollars each one, and their hormone treatment is obviously going to be a problem. And it's not the same thing showering next to someone who is the same sex as you as versus someone who has the genitals of the opposite sex. So but how is it that people so broadly across the United States could believe something so implausible that you can make such a huge change like that and have no impact?
Sure. Now, Obama, he said that he was going to, the time that he was going to be in the White House, 8 years, that he was going to fundamentally reshape America. Has he?
You're right. I think that he did. I think that he, and largely this is through the colleges and universities, I think that he really got a lot more people into higher ed, and he gave the college professoriate much more influence over society at large, and he did a lot of things that allowed the college professoriate to really purge conservatives out of their ranks. And so what you have now is you have higher education sitting there putting 40% of the adult working population through a meat grinder and coming out with a very specific, stilted worldview. And it is scary, but I think that we can stand up and start to reclaim some of these institutions, and that's, I think, where Trump is going and where we have to support Trump in that. I think that we have to follow the money. We have to figure out what federal funds are being used and this misinformation.
Yeah, there's a lot of lies that are being propagated, and I want you to reveal some of those. And before you do, I wanted just to say that when I did the research, and I'm sure you did, and looked into what the reasons might be, there's some politics, as you say, and that's just Washington for you, even with Donald Trump and his administration. They didn't just roll this out and nobody knew. Of course, they knew what was going to be a backlash with the LGBT community, and people were going to have this discussion. But economics, as a good CEO, I'm sure he looked at the dole and he saw that the hormone treatments and the surgeries and what the leaders on the ground were saying, his own people at the Pentagon. I'm sure there's been a lot of research, what apparently there is, that shows that this is a drain, and there's not enough focus going on right now with these folks that are serving. It's not to say that the folks that